The bitter Colorado wind howled like a wounded animal as Tabitha Vaughn clutched her coat tighter around her trembling body. The snowstorm had appeared without warning, transforming the familiar mountain path into an unrecognizable white void that swallowed her whole. Her fingers had long since lost feeling, and each labored breath created plumes of vapor that were instantly swept away by the merciless gale. It was December 1882, and Tabitha had been foolish to believe she could make the journey from Denver to Bonanza alone. At 23, she possessed the determination of youth, but lacked the wisdom to respect these mountains in winter. The stagecoach had refused to travel further due to the approaching storm, but Tabitha was desperate to reach her ailing aunt before Christmas. So she had hired a horse from the livery and set out on her own, a decision she now bitterly regretted as night approached and the temperature plummeted. Her horse had spooked and bolted hours ago when lightning struck a nearby tree, leaving her on foot in the deepening snow. Tabitha's legs burned with exhaustion as she pushed forward, no longer certain which direction led to town. The wind-driven snow had buried the trail completely. "Keep moving," she muttered through chattering teeth. "Stop and you die." She had heard enough tales of mountain winters to know the truth of this. But after hours of struggling through knee-deep drifts, her strength was failing. When she stumbled upon a rocky overhang that offered some shelter from the wind, Tabitha collapsed against the stone wall, grateful for even this meager protection. As darkness fell completely, her thoughts drifted to her aunt in Bonanza, probably watching out her window for a niece who would never arrive. Tabitha's eyelids grew heavy, and though she knew the danger of sleep in such cold, she could no longer fight it. Her last conscious thought was a prayer that someone would find her before it was too late. 10 miles away in his isolated cabin, Thomas Archer stirred restlessly. The veteran cowboy had spent 15 years working ranches across the Colorado Territory, but for the past 5, he'd chosen solitude. At 32, he'd seen enough violence and heartbreak to last several lifetimes. The isolated cabin halfway between Bonanza and the high mountain passes suited him fine. He kept a small herd of cattle, trapped in winter, and made enough selling hides and meat to live comfortably without the complications of town life. Thomas stoked his fire and glanced out the window at the raging storm. Something felt wrong tonight, an uneasiness he couldn't shake. He'd learned long ago to trust his instincts. They'd saved his life more than once during the war and in the dangerous years that followed. His dog, Buck, a massive mountain cur, suddenly lifted his head and whined, staring at the door. "What is it, boy?" Thomas asked, reaching for his rifle out of habit. Buck whined again, more insistently, then barked once. "Someone out there." Thomas pulled on his heavy sheepskin coat and lit a lantern. "Damn fool to be traveling in this weather." He opened the door, bracing against the blast of cold air and swirling snow. Buck pushed past him, nose to the ground, heading toward the trail that eventually led to Denver. Thomas hesitated only a moment before grabbing his pack, extra blankets, and following his dog into the storm. "Show me, Buck," he called, holding the lantern high, though its light barely penetrated the wall of white. The dog moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to ensure Thomas was following. After half an hour of difficult travel, Buck began to bark excitedly. Thomas rushed forward, the wind stealing his breath. The lantern light finally revealed what had disturbed his evening: small, half-filled depressions in the snow. Footprints, nearly obliterated by the continuing snowfall. Human footprints, too small for a man. Thomas's heart raced. Someone was out here, likely disoriented and in grave danger. Following the tracks was difficult as they appeared and disappeared under fresh snow, but Buck seemed to have caught a scent. The dog forged ahead confidently, leading Thomas off the main trail toward a rocky outcropping. "Hello," Thomas called, his voice swallowed by the wind. "Anyone there?" No response came. Buck disappeared around a rock formation, his barking changing tone to urgent yelping. Thomas hurried forward, nearly slipping on the icy ground. When he rounded the corner, his lantern illuminated a sight that stopped his heart. A woman, nearly covered by drifting snow, slumped against the rock face. Thomas rushed to her, brushing snow from her face. Her skin was deathly pale with alarming hints of blue around her lips, but when he pressed fingers to her neck, he felt a faint pulse. "Miss, can you hear me?" He patted her cheek gently, but she didn't stir. She was young, Thomas noted, with delicate features partially obscured by her snow-crusted scarf. Dark hair peeked from beneath a woolen hat. There was no time to search for identification or companions. She needed warmth immediately. Thomas set down the lantern and quickly wrapped her in the extra blankets he'd brought. Then, with careful movements, he lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body stiff with cold. "Good boy, Buck," he murmured to the dog, who circled anxiously. "Let's get her home." The journey back to his cabin seemed interminable. The woman remained unconscious, her breathing so shallow Thomas repeatedly stopped to ensure she still lived. Each time, he found a thready pulse and continued, his own body aching with the strain of carrying her through the deepening snow. By the time his cabin came into view, Thomas's arms burned and his lungs felt raw from the cold air. Buck raced ahead, and Thomas followed with renewed determination. Inside, the warmth hit him like a physical force. He gently laid the woman on his bed, closest to the crackling fireplace. Working quickly, Thomas removed her snow-encrusted outer clothing. Her hands and feet were dangerously cold, though not yet showing signs of severe frostbite. He rubbed them gently with a warm cloth, willing circulation to return. Next, he prepared hot water bottles, wrapping them in thin cloths before placing them against her core and near her feet. "Come on, miss," he murmured as he worked. "Fight." Hours passed with agonizing slowness as Thomas kept vigil. He added wood to the fire, changed the cooling water bottles, and periodically spooned warm broth between her lips, most of which dribbled down her chin. Buck lay beside the bed, his head on his paws, eyes never leaving the stranger. Dawn was breaking when the woman finally stirred. A small moan escaped her lips as her eyelids fluttered open. Thomas, who'd been dozing in a chair beside the bed, jerked awake. "Easy now," he said softly as her eyes, a striking hazel, darted around the unfamiliar room in confusion and fear. "You're safe." She tried to speak but produced only a dry croak. Thomas quickly offered water, supporting her head as she drank greedily. "Who?" she managed, her voice raspy. "Where am I? My name's Thomas Archer. You're in my cabin about 10 miles outside of Bonanza. Found you half frozen in the storm last night." He kept his voice gentle, aware of how disoriented she must feel. "What's your name, miss?" She swallowed hard. "Tabitha Vaughn." "Well, Miss Vaughn, you're lucky to be alive. What in God's name were you doing out in that storm alone?" A flash of indignation crossed her face, immediately followed by resignation. "Trying to reach my aunt in Bonanza. The stagecoach wouldn't continue because of the weather, but I thought I could make it." She closed her eyes briefly. "My horse spooked during the lightning. I tried to follow the trail on foot." Thomas shook his head. "That storm would have challenged even seasoned mountain men. Your fortunate Buck found your trail." At the mention of his name, the dog's tail thumped against the floor. Tabitha's gaze shifted to the animal and a weak smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Buck," she whispered. Thomas rose from his chair. "You should rest. I'll fix some proper food. You need to regain your strength." Tabitha nodded, already drifting back to sleep. Thomas watched her for a moment, struck by the delicate curve of her jaw and the dark lashes that contrasted with her pale skin. Something protective stirred within him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Shaking himself, Thomas moved to the stove. Sentimentality was dangerous. Once the storm cleared, he would take her to Bonanza, to her aunt, and return to his solitude. That was the sensible course. But as he prepared a simple stew, Thomas found himself glancing repeatedly at the sleeping woman in his bed, wondering about her story and why she'd risked her life to reach Bonanza. Tabitha woke fully several hours later to the aroma of cooking food. Her body ached as though she'd been trampled by cattle, but the bone-deep cold had receded. She pushed herself to sitting position, wincing at her stiff muscles. Thomas turned from the stove. "Careful now. Your body's been through an ordeal. How long have I been here?" she asked, noting the fading light outside the window. "Nearly a full day. You've been drifting in and out." He approached with a steaming bowl. "Think you can eat something substantial now?" Tabitha nodded, suddenly aware of her hunger. As she took the bowl, her fingers brushed against his, and she was struck by their roughness. Working hands, strong and capable. "Thank you, Mr. Archer. I don't know how to repay your kindness." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. Perhaps, but not every man would have been out in that storm to find me in the first place. She took a spoonful of the stew, savoring the warmth and flavor. "This is delicious. Simple trail cooking, nothing fancy." Tabitha studied him as she ate. Thomas Archer was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean build of a man accustomed to physical labor. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into countless horizons. A neatly trimmed beard covered his jaw, and his hair was dark brown with hints of copper where the lamplight caught it. His eyes, however, were what captured her attention, a clear, penetrating blue that seemed to see more than she wished to reveal. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, seeking to fill the awkward silence. "5 years. He sat in the chair beside the bed, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "Before that, I worked cattle on ranches throughout the territory. And now I prefer my own company." His tone discouraged further questions, but Tabitha had never been one to heed such warnings. "No family," a shadow crossed his face. "None living." "I'm sorry," she said softly. Thomas changed the subject. "Your aunt in Bonanza, she'll be worried about you." Tabitha nodded, guilt washing over her. "Her name is Alina Prescott. She's been ill, that's why I was so determined to reach her. She's my only family." She hesitated. "The storm, is it still bad outside?" "It's let up some, but there's 3 feet of fresh snow. The trail to town won't be passable for at least 2 days, maybe more." Alarm flashed through Tabitha. 2 days? But my aunt is likely concerned but safe in town. Bonanza's a tight community. If she's known there, folks will be checking on her." Tabitha wanted to argue but knew he was right. She finished her stew in silence, her mind racing with worry for her aunt and the awkwardness of her situation. She was alone in a remote cabin with a man she'd just met, a scenario that would horrify her former finishing school teachers. "Mr. Archer, I realize this is terribly improper, but I'm grateful for your hospitality until the trail clears." A rare smile crossed his face, transforming his stern features. "Miss Vaughn, out here, survival trumps propriety. Besides, Buck will serve as chaperone." The dog lifted his head at his name, tail thumping. "He's quite particular about proper behavior." The tension broken, Tabitha found herself smiling in return. "Well, in that case, I feel quite safe." As night fell again, Thomas insisted Tabitha keep the bed while he made a pallet near the fire. Despite her protests, he was immovable on this point. In the darkness, listening to his deep, even breathing and the occasional snore from Buck, Tabitha felt an unexpected sense of security. Thomas Archer was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes about his character. She drifted to sleep wondering what events had driven such a man to seek isolation in these mountains, and why the sadness in his blue eyes stirred something protective in her own heart. Morning brought watery sunlight, and the revelation that Thomas Archer maintained strict routines despite his guest. Tabitha woke to find him already returned from tending his small herd of cattle, stamping snow from his boots by the door. "There's coffee on the stove," he offered, noticing her awake. "How are you feeling?" Tabitha stretched cautiously. "Better. Still sore, but not as though I might shatter if I move too quickly." "Good. The circulation's fully returned to your extremities. You're lucky no frostbite." She swung her legs over the side of the bed, suddenly conscious of her rumpled appearance and the fact that she was wearing one of his flannel shirts as a nightgown. Her clothes hung drying near the fire. Thomas tactfully turned his back, busying himself with something in his pack. "There's water for washing in the basin. I'll step out while you dress." "Thank you." Tabitha waited until the door closed behind him before hurrying to wash her face and hands in the cold water. Her reflection in the small mirror above the basin shocked her, pale with dark circles under her eyes, her normally neat hair a tangled mess. She did her best to make herself presentable with her limited resources, then quickly dressed in her now dry clothing. When Thomas returned, she was seated at his small table, hands wrapped around a cup of strong coffee. "Your color's better," he observed, pouring himself coffee. "Hungry?" "Yes, actually." She watched as he efficiently prepared a breakfast of flapjacks and bacon. "Do you always eat so well out here alone?" he shrugged. "A man needs proper food to work. I hunt, keep chickens for eggs, trade in town when necessary." "It's impressive. I know many men who can barely boil water without a woman's help." Thomas placed a plate before her. "My mother died when I was 14. My father was useless with domestic matters. I learned or went hungry." This casual mention of his past intrigued Tabitha. "Where were you raised?" "Missouri originally, then Kansas after the war." He sat across from her, his own plate piled high. "And you?" "You don't strike me as someone raised in these mountains." "Is it that obvious?" Tabitha smiled ruefully. "I grew up in Boston. My father was a professor at Harvard. After my parents died of influenza 4 years ago, I moved west to live with my aunt. That's quite a change." "Yes. I've had to adjust to many things." She took a bite of flapjack, savoring the surprising lightness. "These are delicious." A hint of pride crossed his face. "My mother's recipe." After breakfast, Tabitha insisted on helping with the dishes despite Thomas's protests. As they worked side by side, she felt an ease developing between them, a comfortable rhythm that belied their short acquaintance. "The storm's passing," Thomas commented, glancing out the window at the brightening sky. "But the snow's deep. We should be able to reach town tomorrow if no more comes." Tabitha felt an unexpected twinge of disappointment. Their forced companionship would soon end. "I've imposed on you long enough," she said politely. "It's no imposition." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "It's been pleasant having company." The admission clearly cost him something, and Tabitha felt touched by his honesty. "For me as well, despite the circumstances." Thomas suggested she rest while he tended to outdoor chores, but Tabitha refused. "I've been idle too long. Is there something useful I can do?" He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You could help me check traps. The exercise would be good for you and the fresh air. But you'll need warmer clothing." From a trunk, he produced an old coat, smaller than his own but still too large for her frame, and a pair of wool-lined gloves. "These belong to a young ranch hand who stayed here briefly last winter," he explained. "They'll be big, but better than your city clothes." Bundled in the borrowed gear, Tabitha followed Thomas outside. The world had been transformed into a glittering expanse of white, so bright it hurt her eyes. Buck bounded ahead, disappearing into snowdrifts only to emerge shaking powder from his coat. "It's beautiful," she breathed, temporarily forgetting the deadly danger this same snow had presented just days before. Thomas nodded. "These mountains have many faces. Beautiful one moment, deadly the next." He gestured toward a path leading into the pine forest. "Stay close. It's easy to lose direction even on a clear day." They spent the morning checking Thomas's rabbit snares. He showed Tabitha how to identify animal tracks in the snow, pointing out the difference between rabbit, fox, and deer trails. His knowledge of the wilderness impressed her, as did his evident respect for the animals he hunted. "I only take what I need," he explained as he reset a trap. "Waste is disrespectful to the creatures that sustain us." By midday, they had collected 3 rabbits, which Thomas expertly field-dressed before they headed back to the cabin. The physical exertion had left Tabitha pleasantly tired, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. Inside the cabin, Thomas set about preparing the rabbits for stewing. Tabitha watched his efficient movements, the way his large hands managed delicate tasks with surprising grace. "May I help?" she asked. He glanced up, seeming surprised by the offer. "You know how to prepare game?" "Not really," she admitted, "but I can learn." A small smile tugged at his lips. Not many city women would volunteer for such a task. "I'm not many women." The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended, and Thomas's eyebrows rose. "No," he agreed softly. "You're not." He showed her how to cut vegetables for the stew, and they worked in companionable silence. Occasionally their hands would brush, sending an unexpected warmth through Tabitha that had nothing to do with the fire. As evening approached, Thomas brought out a worn deck of cards and taught Tabitha to play poker. They used dried beans as chips, and her natural competitive spirit soon had her thoroughly engaged in the game. "You're a quick study," Thomas commented as she won her 3rd hand in a row. Tabitha grinned. "My father always said I had an aptitude for strategy, a dangerous quality in a woman." "Is that a complaint, Mr. Archer?" His blue eyes crinkled at the corners. "An observation, Miss Vaughn." As night deepened and the fire burned low, their conversation turned more personal. Thomas spoke haltingly of his time during the Civil War, fighting for the Union as a very young man, and the difficult years that followed. Tabitha shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her struggle to find her place after her parents' deaths, and her gradual adaptation to life in the West. "Why Bonanza?" Thomas asked. "It's hardly a cultural center. My aunt is my only living relative. When my parents died, she offered me a home." Tabitha stared into her cup of coffee. "She runs the town library, small as it is. She's built a good life there, and she's helped me find my footing. And now she's ill." Tabitha nodded. "A lung ailment. The doctor is concerned about her surviving the winter." Her voice caught. "That's why I was so determined to reach her. I couldn't bear the thought of her alone if—" Thomas reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly. "We'll get you to her tomorrow, I promise." The simple touch and the sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to Tabitha's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, embarrassed by her emotion. "Thank you," she managed. "Not just for that, but for everything. I would have died out there if not for you and Buck." Thomas withdrew his hand, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest, Miss Vaughn. We'll leave at first light." That night, Tabitha lay awake long after Thomas's breathing had deepened into sleep. She found herself studying his profile in the dying firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way one arm was flung protectively over Buck's sleeping form. In just 2 days, this stranger had become someone whose presence felt natural, comforting. Tomorrow they would reach Bonanza, and this brief interlude would end. Thomas would return to his solitary existence, and she would resume her life in town. The thought left her with an unexpected hollowness in her chest that had nothing to do with her recent brush with death. Morning arrived with clear skies and biting cold. Thomas was already preparing the horses when Tabitha emerged from the cabin, dressed in her own clothes with his borrowed coat. "Your mare returned during the night," he explained, indicating a familiar chestnut horse. She found her way back to civilization after all. Tabitha approached the animal cautiously. "Hello, girl, I'm glad you're safe." The mare nuzzled her hand in recognition. "She seems no worse for her adventure," Thomas commented, securing supplies to his own mount, a sturdy black gelding. "Animals often have better sense than humans when it comes to survival." "A pointed observation, Mr. Archer." His lips twitched. "Perhaps." Buck circled the horses excitedly, clearly understanding they were traveling. Thomas secured the cabin, then helped Tabitha mount her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact left her flustered, a reaction she attributed to her still recovering condition. The journey to Bonanza took most of the day, following trails that only Thomas seemed able to discern beneath the snow. He led them through passes and across small valleys, occasionally stopping to point out landmarks or wildlife tracks. Tabitha found herself memorizing these moments, storing away the sound of his voice as he explained the mountain ecology, the way sunlight caught in his beard when he turned to ensure she was following safely. It was late afternoon when they crested a ridge, and Bonanza came into view below them, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys into the clear air. Despite her concern for her aunt, Tabitha felt a pang of regret that their journey was ending. "Not much to look at compared to Boston," Thomas commented, misinterpreting her expression. "It's home now," she replied simply. As they rode into town, Tabitha noted the curious glances from townsfolk clearing snow from walkways or hauling supplies. News traveled quickly in Bonanza, and she knew her disappearance during the storm would have caused concern. A woman traveling alone with a strange man would certainly set tongues wagging. They stopped first at Dr. Miller's house, where Tabitha's aunt had been staying for treatment. Thomas insisted on accompanying her to the door, his protective instinct evident in the way he positioned himself slightly ahead of her as they approached. Dr. Miller himself answered their knock, his aged face breaking into astonished relief at the sight of Tabitha. "Miss Vaughn, thank the Lord." He ushered them inside, calling over his shoulder, "Eleanor, it's your niece, she's alive." Tabitha rushed past him to the sitting room where her aunt reclined on a chaise, a patchwork quilt covering her thin frame. Eleanor Prescott's face, already pale from illness, went white with shock, then flushed with joy. "Tabitha, my dear girl." Tears streamed down the older woman's face as Tabitha embraced her. "When the stage arrived without you and then the storm came, we feared the worst. I'm so sorry to have worried you, Aunt Eleanor." Tabitha sat beside her, clutching her frail hands. "I was foolish to try traveling alone, but I couldn't bear to wait when I knew you were ill." "Always headstrong," her aunt chided gently, then looked past Tabitha to where Thomas stood awkwardly by the door. "And who is this gentleman?" Tabitha turned, suddenly realizing how the situation must appear. "This is Mr. Thomas Archer. He found me during the storm and saved my life." Aliner's sharp eyes took in Thomas's rugged appearance. "Then I am forever in your debt, Mr. Archer. Please, come sit and tell me how you managed to find my impulsive niece in such weather." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "It was my dog who found her tracks, madam. I just followed." "Modesty is admirable, but please join us." "Dr. Miller, would you bring tea?" The doctor nodded, giving Thomas an appraising look before leaving for the kitchen. Thomas reluctantly took a seat, removing his hat and holding it in his hands. For the next hour, Aliner drew the story from them both, her eyes widening at Tabitha's description of being lost, and Thomas's account of finding her nearly frozen. Throughout the telling, Tabitha noticed how Thomas downplayed his role, emphasizing instead her own resilience. "2 days alone in that cabin," Aliner mused when they finished. "My dear, your reputation will require some repair." Tabitha flushed. "And Aliner, Mr. Archer was a perfect gentleman." "Of course he was," Aliner said smoothly. "Nevertheless, people talk." She fixed Thomas with a direct gaze. "Mr. Archer, would you do us the honor of joining us for dinner? Perhaps your presence might help quell some of the inevitable gossip." Thomas looked startled. "I should return to my cabin before dark." "Nonsense. The mountains will still be there tomorrow." "Dr. Miller has ample room, and I insist. It's the least we can offer after your heroism." Trapped by politeness, Thomas reluctantly agreed. Tabitha felt both embarrassed by her aunt's transparent machinations and selfishly glad for a few more hours in Thomas's company. Dr. Miller's housekeeper prepared a simple but hearty dinner, and the conversation flowed more easily than Tabitha expected. Thomas, though still reserved, showed glimpses of dry humor that delighted Aliner. The older woman was clearly taken with him, asking thoughtful questions about his life in the mountains that drew him out of his shell. After dinner, when Aliner retired to rest, and Dr. Miller was called away to attend a patient, Tabitha and Thomas found themselves alone in the parlor. "Your aunt is quite a formidable woman," Thomas remarked, standing by the window. Tabitha smiled. "She's always been strong-willed. The illness has weakened her body but not her spirit. I see the family resemblance, in appearance, in determination." His eyes met hers, and something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. "You would have died out there, but you fought. Not everyone has that strength." Tabitha moved to stand beside him, looking out at the moonlit snow. "I had something to live for, someone waiting for me." "That makes all the difference." There was a hollowness in his voice that made her turn to study his profile. "And you, Thomas, what do you live for in your mountain solitude?" He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Peace," he finally said. "After the war, after everything. I needed quiet. And have you found it? Until recently." A smile ghosted across his lips. "Then a stubborn Boston woman disrupted my tranquility." Tabitha laughed softly. "For which I apologize. Tomorrow you can return to your peaceful existence." Thomas turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly serious. Tabitha, Dr. Miller's return interrupted whatever he had been about to say. The moment broken, Thomas stepped back, resuming his reserved demeanor. That night, in the guest room Dr. Miller provided, Tabitha lay awake thinking of the man sleeping down the hall. In just 3 days, Thomas Archer had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully understand. Tomorrow he would ride back to his cabin, and their paths might never cross again. The thought left an ache in her chest that no amount of rational thinking could dispel. Morning came with a light snowfall, and the news that Aliner had suffered a difficult night. Dr. Miller's face was grave as he explained her condition had worsened. "The excitement was perhaps too much," he told Tabitha. "She's resting now, but I'm concerned about the progression of her illness." Tabitha sat at her aunt's bedside, holding her thin hand as the older woman slept fitfully. When Thomas appeared in the doorway to say goodbye, Tabitha felt torn between her duty to her aunt and her desire to properly thank the man who had saved her life. Eleanor solved her dilemma by waking and noticing Thomas. "You're leaving, Mr. Archer?" she asked weakly. "Yes, madam." "I've imposed long enough." "Nonsense," she gestured for him to approach. "I have a favor to ask, if I may." Thomas moved to the bedside, his large frame seeming out of place in the delicate sick room. "Of course. My niece will need assistance in the coming weeks. The library must be managed, and I fear I shall be confined here longer than expected." Eleanor's eyes, though tired, remained sharp. "Might you consider staying in Bonanza a while longer? There's a small apartment above the library where Tabitha has been living. You could use the spare room." "Aunt Eleanor," Tabitha protested, mortified. "Mr. Archer has his own life, his own responsibilities. We couldn't possibly impose. It's a reasonable request," Eleanor continued calmly. "The winter makes regular travel to your cabin difficult, does it not, Mr. Archer? And the library pays a modest salary." Thomas looked between the two women, clearly caught off guard. "I have animals that need tending." "The Peterson boy could check on them," Eleanor suggested. "He's reliable and knows the mountains well." I would need to consider it." Thomas met Tabitha's eyes, his expression unreadable. "It's an unexpected offer, of course. Discuss it with Tabitha. She can show you the library and the accommodations." Eleanor settled back against her pillows, the brief conversation having tired her. "Think of it as my way of repaying your kindness to my niece." After Eleanor drifted back to sleep, Tabitha led Thomas out of the sick room, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I apologize for my aunt. She can be rather direct." "You should feel no obligation. Would my presence be unwelcome to you?" Thomas interrupted, his voice low. The question startled her. "No, not at all. I understand you value your solitude." "I do," he hesitated, "but perhaps I've had enough of it for a while." Hope fluttered in Tabitha's chest. "Then you'll consider it." "Truly, I'd like to see this library first," he said with the ghost of a smile. "Ensure I'm qualified for such scholarly employment." Relief and happiness washed over Tabitha. "It's hardly the Harvard Library, Mr. Archer. I think you'll find the requirements well within your capabilities." The Bonanza Library occupied a modest building on the town's main street, sandwiched between the general store and the milliner's shop. Tabitha unlocked the door with the key she kept on a chain around her neck, ushering Thomas into the quiet space. Though small, the library was well organized and surprisingly well stocked. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books on every subject from agriculture to zoology. A pot-bellied stove provided heat, and several tables with chairs offered reading space. A large desk near the entrance clearly served as the librarian's station. "My aunt began this library 10 years ago," Tabitha explained, running her hand lovingly along a shelf. "She convinced mining companies and wealthy Denver families to donate books. Every month, she adds more volumes." Thomas moved through the space, examining titles with evident interest. Impressive for a town this size. Education matters, even perhaps especially in remote places. Tabitha watched him pull down a volume of Thoreau, handling it with unexpected reverence. "You enjoy reading." "When I have the opportunity." He replaced the book carefully. "My father valued learning despite his other shortcomings." Tabitha led him to a narrow staircase at the back of the library. "The apartment is up here. It's simple but comfortable." The living quarters consisted of a small sitting room with a fireplace, a compact kitchen, and 2 bedrooms separated by a short hallway. The furnishings were modest but well maintained, with colorful quilts and handmade cushions adding warmth to the space. Aunt Alina lived here alone until I joined her, Tabitha explained. The second bedroom was for guests, though we rarely had any. Thomas stood in the center of the sitting room, looking slightly out of place among the feminine touches. It's a fine apartment. The spare room is this way. Tabitha showed him the smaller of the two bedrooms, watching his face for any sign of his thoughts. I understand if it's too confined after your cabin. Thomas turned to her, his expression serious. Why do you want me to stay, Tabitha? The directness of his question caught her off guard. My aunt needs help with the library while she's ill. Is that the only reason? Tabitha felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. No, she admitted softly. I've come to value your company, as unexpected as that might be for both of us. Something in his face softened. I've spent 5 years avoiding connections with others. It seemed safer. And now I find myself reconsidering. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the varying shades of blue in his eyes. If I stay, people will talk. They already are, she pointed out. We spent 2 nights alone in your cabin. My reputation is likely beyond repair. A smile tugged at his lips. Then I suppose my staying won't make matters worse. Is that a yes, Mr. Archer? It's a yes, Miss Vaughn. His hand rose hesitantly, then brushed a strand of hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. Though I make no promises about my abilities as a librarian, Tabitha's heart raced at his touch. I'm willing to take that chance. The next weeks brought significant changes to both their lives. Thomas settled into the apartment above the library, transforming the spare room with his few possessions. Buck adapted surprisingly well to town life, quickly becoming a favorite with the local children who visited the library. Thomas arranged for young Jamie Peterson to check on his cabin and livestock every few days, paying the boy from his new salary. Though initially awkward in his role as assistant librarian, Thomas proved a quick study. His knowledge of practical subjects complemented Tabitha's more academic background, and together they served the community's diverse needs. Alina's condition stabilized but did not improve. She remained at Dr. Miller's house, receiving daily visits from Tabitha and, increasingly often, Thomas as well. The older woman clearly approved of their growing friendship, though she was tactful enough not to comment directly. Living in such close quarters, Tabitha and Thomas developed a comfortable routine. They took meals together, often discussing books they'd discovered in the library's collection. In the evenings, Thomas would read by the fire while Tabitha worked on correspondence or mending. The domesticity of it struck Tabitha as both strange and wonderfully natural. Their relationship remained formally proper, despite the gossip that inevitably circulated through the small town. Thomas was unfailingly respectful, never presuming upon their unusual living arrangement. Yet Tabitha felt the growing tension between them in the way his eyes followed her movements, in how carefully they avoided touching when passing in the narrow hallway. Winter deepened, bringing more snow and bitter cold that kept many townsfolk close to home. The library became a welcome refuge for those seeking warmth and entertainment, and Tabitha found herself busier than ever. One evening in late January, after a particularly busy day, she was shelving returned books when Thomas approached with a letter in hand. "This came for you today," he said, his expression uncharacteristically tense. "From Denver." Tabitha took the envelope, recognizing the letterhead of Wellington Academy for Young Ladies, a prestigious school where she had applied for a teaching position months earlier, before Alina's illness had worsened. "Thank you." She set it aside without opening it. Thomas's eyebrows rose. "Aren't you curious about its contents? I can guess. It's likely an offer for the spring term." She continued shelving, aware of his gaze upon her. You applied for a teaching position before my aunt became seriously ill before. She hesitated. Before the storm. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Before everything changed. Yes. Don't you want to know if they've accepted you? Tabitha finally met his gaze. Does it matter? I won't be accepting the position. Why not? His voice was carefully neutral. It's a prestigious opportunity, isn't it? It is. She set down the book in her hands, giving him her full attention. But my place is here now, with my aunt, with the library. She took a deep breath. With you, if I'm not being presumptuous. Thomas's expression softened. Tabitha, the library door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and 3 miners seeking refuge from the snow. The moment broken, Thomas stepped back, resuming his professional demeanor. I'll help them, he said quietly, moving away. That night, Tabitha lay awake long after the household had gone silent, thinking about the letter and her future. When she heard movement in the sitting room, she rose, wrapping a shawl around her nightgown, and found Thomas stoking the fire. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He glanced up, his face shadowed in the firelight. "Too much on my mind." Tabitha moved to sit in the chair opposite him. "About the letter, partly." He sank back into his own chair, watching the flames. "You shouldn't dismiss such an opportunity lightly. It's not a light decision. Your aunt would want you to advance your career. She values education highly." Tabitha studied him, suddenly understanding. "You think I should leave?" "I think you should consider all your options." His voice was carefully controlled. "Bonanza is a small place. A woman of your intelligence and education deserves—" "Don't tell me what I deserve," she interrupted, a flash of anger surprising them both. "That's for me to decide." Thomas fell silent, still staring into the fire. "Why are you pushing me away?" she asked finally. I believed we were building something here." "We are." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. "But I can't be the reason you limit your future." "Is that what you think? That staying would limit me?" Tabitha leaned forward, willing him to meet her eyes. "Thomas, before the storm, before you, I was existing, not living. Teaching at Wellington would be respectable, comfortable even, but it wouldn't make me happy." "And what would?" His blue eyes finally met hers, intense and questioning. The moment stretched between them, filled with all the words they'd left unspoken over the weeks. Tabitha gathered her courage. Us. She gestured to the room around them, to the life they'd begun creating together. "I know it's unconventional. I know we haven't known each other long. But I've never felt more alive, more myself than these past weeks with you." Thomas's expression softened, vulnerability replacing his careful reserve. "I've been alone so long, Tabitha. I convinced myself it was better that way, safer. And now I find the thought of returning to that solitude unbearable." He rose from his chair and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "But I need to know you're choosing this life, choosing me for the right reasons, not out of gratitude or circumstance." Tabitha freed one hand to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "I'm choosing you because in the midst of the worst storm of my life you found me, and every day since, you've shown me what kind of man you are: honorable, intelligent, kind." She smiled softly. "The fact that you're trying to send me away only proves how much you care about my happiness." "I do care." His voice was rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible after so much loss." "Then trust me to know my own mind, Thomas Archer. Trust that when I say I want to stay, it's because She hesitated, then finished simply, "because I love you." The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, Thomas seemed frozen, his eyes searching hers as if looking for any sign of doubt. Finding none, he drew her gently from the chair into his arms. "I love you too, Tabitha Vaughn," he whispered against her hair. God help me. I've tried not to, but it seems I'm not strong enough to resist. Then don't resist. She lifted her face to his, and his lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with weeks of restrained longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "What will your aunt say?" Tabitha laughed softly. "I suspect she's been planning this since the moment you walked into her sick room. A formidable strategist. Indeed." She grew serious again. "What about your cabin? Your life in the mountains? The cabin will remain a refuge when we need one, but my life is wherever you are now." His hands framed her face with tender reverence. "If you'll have me." "I will." She kissed him again, sealing their commitment. The following morning they visited Alina together, hands clasped as they entered her room at Dr. Miller's house. The older woman took one look at their faces and smiled. "It appears congratulations are in order," she said weakly. "We'd like your blessing, Aunt Alina," Tabitha said, squeezing Thomas's hand. "You've had it from the moment he carried you out of that storm, my dear." Alina reached for them both. Love found in adversity is often the strongest kind. 2 weeks later, with Alina's health improved enough for her to attend, Tabitha and Thomas were married in Bonanza's small church. The ceremony was simple, attended by townspeople who had watched their unusual courtship with interest. Dr. Miller gave the bride away, and Buck served as an unofficial ring bearer, much to the delight of the congregation. Spring brought renewal to both the mountains and their lives. Alina recovered enough to return to her own small house, though she relinquished full control of the library to Tabitha and Thomas. The newly married couple continued to live in the apartment above the library, expanding their collection and services to the growing community. On weekends, they often rode to Thomas's cabin, spending peaceful days away from town life. Tabitha came to love the mountain solitude as much as he did, learning the rhythms of the wilderness under his patient tutelage. Together, they created a life that balanced community and solitude, civilization and wilderness. 1 year after the storm that had brought them together, they stood on the ridge overlooking the valley where Thomas had found Tabitha's tracks in the snow. "It's strange to think how close I came to dying here," she reflected, her hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach where their first child grew. "If you hadn't found my footprints—" Thomas pulled her close, his arm protective around her shoulders. "But I did find them. And I'll always follow wherever they lead. Even when they lead you out of your comfortable solitude," she teased, "especially then." He kissed her temple gently. "The storm took you from your path, but it brought you to mine. I'll be grateful for that until my dying day." As they turned their horses back toward Bonanza and the life they were building, snow began falling softly, not the dangerous blizzard of the previous year, but gentle flakes that glittered in the winter sunlight. Nature's reminder of how their love began, in the wild heart of the Colorado mountains, where a desperate tracking of footprints had led to a lifetime of shared steps.